Live from a windowless office above the parts counter, Fixed Ops Focus, starring Dave Rogers and Steve Shaw.
Whew, here we go again, Mr. Dave Rogers. How you doing, sir? What's on your mind tonight?
I'm doing fantastic, Steve. Fantastic.
I love it. How'd your month close out? Do you have a good month for your company?
Yeah, so far so good. We still got some statements that we're waiting on, but overall we're up in fixed ops as a group, which is great. I think it was a little bit of a up and down month. I think it started out slow and then it started finishing up. You got graduations and all that fun stuff. I can go back to my master book of excuses and find a couple of them for June if I look it up. But yeah, it wasn't bad. It wasn't terrible.
I think a lot of people kind of they pulled it off. A lot of people pulled it off at the last hour. You know, what's funny is we were talking the other day. We were I got a lot of comments about the RO marketing piece as well, and I'd still like some more. It's pretty funny. And after watching it too and thinking about wrapping that whole thing up, it's pretty common sense. It's just common sense.
We've been getting I've been talking to some of the service managers, talked to a general manager today on the way home, stuck in traffic. And the one term that came out of this GM's mouth was, it's genius. That's what he said. Sheer genius. That's what he said. Now, this guy, he will push the envelope, which is good. He will run it as hard as he can. But yeah, I mean, a couple of people have expressed interest. One of my service managers mentioned he's going to try it on the drive. I mean, in the express area. And, I got a couple other people that are just thinking about it. So I know some took the little synopsis home for the weekend and studied it. So I'll follow up on them, how they're doing later in this week. So
that's awesome. Very cool. Well, in those two episodes we were talking and we both touched on this subject, and I think it would be cool to talk about, but you brought it up and it was the break-even analysis. And in my travels as Steve Shaw, the behavior trainer, right, the MPI guy or whatever, it doesn't really come up very often, but it's mind blowing how about that. So I just wanted to throw that back to you and say, what are your thoughts about it? Tell me about it. What do you do? How do you work with it? How do you approach that in your stores? I think that's something to talk about.
I mean, it's probably one of the first things I look at anytime I grab a financial statement. I'm in my fixed ops role, so I'll look at the service department, I'll look at the parts department. And if they're losing money, the first thing I do is try to back into what does it take to break even. I mean, I think, we strive for net 20, net 30, net 40% of gross, but if you're losing money, then you got to start with the break even point, right? So,
right.
And to keep the math simple is if you have 100,000 in expenses and, you're only doing 90,000 in gross, you're losing 10 G's, right? Right. And there's a lot of different reasons. People will say, oh, but Dave, I don't know how the rent is allocated. I don't know how this is allocated. I'll start with, it is one of the things you have to look at when you look at your fixed expenses overall. But generally speaking, that's not the majority of your expenses. Your rent, your insurance, and those items that are in the fixed expenses aren't the majority of it. The majority of it are above that. It's going to be your variable, your semi-variable, your personnel expense. That's where you're going to find the heavy, the 75% of your expenses. But, let's just say that, the store is set up right. You got the fixed expenses allocated the way your owner wants. And, your store, well, I used to have a fight with my controllers when they would, they were always like, well, the square footage of the shop is bigger, so you should pay more rent. And I used to argue that the showroom's closer to the highway, so their square footage is more expensive, right? They have better frontage. If you put my service department in the front, then maybe you can make that argument, right? So,
but you said it though. It's how do you want it, Mr. Dealer? It's a fight we're not going to win.
You're right. You're not going to win it, right?
That's the first excuse. We got a high rent factor. Well, I don't give a fuck. It's
right.
What it is.
Yeah, 99% of the dealers out there own the land and the rent is their number anyway. It goes to their real estate company. So, whether it's split 50-50 sales to service and parts, whether it's 55-45, it doesn't really matter. Like I said, the swing isn't that important when you get down to the break-even spot. So you have to get there. You have to get rid of those excuses. But, if I have $100,000 and I'll just take it, you just keep it very simple is, if my gross profit percentage at the bottom of my labor column, I try to eliminate sublet when I do it. So I sit there, customer pay warranty, internal PDI, whatever the case may be. And then there's usually a subtotal line on your statement. I'll take that gross profit percentage and I'll divide it by the expenses. and I'll come up with that's the sales I need to break even.
Right, right, right.
That's the backwards math, right?
Yeah.
So divided by, 70%, whatever the case may be. And that's going to give me a break even before sublet, before any of the other adjustments. So it's hedging a little bit, right? If you make a little bit of money on sublet, as long as you don't lose any money on unapplied labor, then you're okay. But that's where I start. And I do the same thing in parts. I'm looking at that, that bottom line number, and I've done it in sales. And, there's calculations on how much of the expense the service parts and used car department cover for the facility. And then you can find out your new car break even point. How many new cars do I need to sell to break even type thing? But for fixed ops related, that's how I just do the quick math.
Well, that's amazing because again, we don't talk about it very often. And I often get into these pricing strategy conversations with people, and we'll say, okay, I'll say, what's your pricing strategy? And they'll go, what do you mean? And I'll talk about, how do you price your work? What do you do here? What do you do there? We go through the whole litany of menu items and, all the different maintenance items that you can price. But I go, how do you know what this should be priced at? I mean, you have zero idea. And most of the time people are just guessing like, well, I want $150 an hour. I want X, Y, and Z flat. I want this or I want that. But wouldn't you want to base that upon something like a concrete number that if my goal is to break even, or if my goal is to do X, Y, and Z, we should know our break even first before we even start building a menu, before we even start. What is our labor rate supposed to be? Right. And I think there's so many things that we got to do to look at before we even go, I want to charge $150 for an alignment. Like if we don't even know what our break even is or where our owner wants us to be, the price of that alignment is irrelevant. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you have to keep in mind the competitiveness on certain things.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, absolutely. I mean, when you're looking at, if you're looking at a startup store or a store you just walk into, you have to evaluate all of that. I mean, I try to keep it as simple as possible. I'm going to focus on sales. I'm not going to focus on gross today. When I first do this, what do I need to sell to break even, right? Assuming my gross profit percentage stays the same. And in your case, when you get to competitive items like, an alignment, a rotate, an oil change, stuff like that, that's going to shrink your gross profit margin. So you have to sell a little bit more to get that, but it should all work out if you're doing a good labor mix. But yeah, you have to start out with something in mind, right? But you do have to look at your competitors. You have to look at what's the going rate.
Yeah,
Years ago,
I agree with you on that.
years ago, you used to open up the Sunday newspaper and the automotive section, and you flip a page in, and you could see what Goodyear was selling tires for. You could see what oil changes were going for, timing belts were going for, shocks were going for. You had it that was your competitive items, right? That's what you knew the local market was, right? Now you have to mystery shop it. There's nobody uses a newspaper anymore unless you get the value bundle of
Yeah.
coupons mailed to you.
Yeah. My point was just this. Like if we don't know our break even or we don't know what our goal for net profit is, then I mean alignment maybe been the wrong one, but
Yeah.
what should our labor rate be? We don't even know what we should be charging per hour. Starting out, what should our labor rate be? What is our capacity in our shop, right? If I've got 8 technicians and I'm trying to make, I got $100,000, nut. If I got to make $100,000, I got 8 techs. Well, what does my posted door rate have to be to start with, right? I got to figure out that in the first place, and then
Yeah.
you can work through the other numbers. But if we don't know, and then again, if that's just to break even, right? And so if my dealer expects me to make a profit, well, I should figure that in first. I guess that was my point is starting out with, I think that break even number is probably one of the most important numbers that we don't even talk about. We don't even look at. It's not on normal people's radars.
Yeah, I mean, if you take the example, let's, keep the math fairly simple, but, it's $100,000 and, I'm at a 70% gross profit. I need roughly 143,000 a month in sales to get that number, right? And like you said, what is the, now I got my dogs
You got your dog.
marching around. Hold on, it's crazy. So, what is the number? So I got $143,000, right? How many lifts do I have? Like you said, okay, I have 7 lifts. I need 20,000 a lift, right? In sales. How am I going to get to 20,000 a lift? If the guys produce 10 hours a day, how many days a week do I work, et cetera, et cetera. And then, yes, it goes back into your point is, what is my labor rate going to be? What is my door rate going to be?
Yeah, in order to achieve that, if I need 20 grand to lift or, or per stall or however you want to say it, if I'm going to achieve that, I got to start out with a baseline. And the baseline would be I got to make a profit, right? I got to make a profit. And I start figuring out these other numbers. And what I think is interesting is, I mean, like I said, I'm not doing that. I do menus for people quite a bit. And I will generally say, what do you want your effective labor rate to be? What do you want your gross to be? Would be the question first. But I would say, what do you want your gross profit to be? What do you want your effective labor rate to be? Where are you? I get some general numbers from them, and it's almost an assumption that I make that they know what they're talking about, right? Or they know why they want this or whatever. I did have a guy one time up in your neck of the woods in Jersey. I said, "What would you like your effective labor rate to be? What would you like your effective labor rate to be on your menu items or something like that?" He goes 2.1 hours a ticket.
Okay.
And I said, "Well, okay, well, we need a timeout here because you didn't answer my question, and you obviously have no idea what we're talking about." And so, and again, I'm the behavior guy, so I don't do that often, but I think about that quite a bit. That there are people in these roles that are not being taught how to do what is a break even analysis. What is it? They are not being taught that, and they're not really getting down the right path to understand. So that if I need $143,000, right? I was going to pull my calculator out, but that might get boring. When it's all said and done, if I need $143,000 in sales, how many flat rate hours I got to produce, and at what rate do I got to produce them? Is really would be the next step.
Right. I mean, again, you take the sales, I'm open 20 days a month if that's what you're going to do, right? However you want to factor that. I have 7 technicians, right? You're going to divide it by your technician availability to productivity. I mean, if you just take a flat, I don't know, 200 hours a month per technician, right? What does that equate to? I mean, just rough math, I'd probably tell you just off the top of my head, 143,000 divided by 7, 20,000 a tech, divided by 200 hours, you're talking about $102 an hour is probably what you need to get, right?
There
To
you
hit that
go.
number. It's probably not that bad, and I'm just winging it. I mean, you probably could figure that out, but I mean, that's kind of where your number would be. Now, again, that's just a break even, right?
Right, right.
If I want to factor in, so I'm a greedy SOB. I want to be, 20, 30%, right? So everyone says, well, how do you figure that out? Well, the shortcut is if you're getting 70% gross profit, if you just shave it to 60% or 50% or 40%, you're building in the buffer to get you to get whatever you want to do, right? So that's the cheap math. That's just the quick math. So I think if you did, $100,000 divided by 0.40, you're at 250,000 a month now in
Right,
sales, right?
right.
So I got to put another 100,000. I got to put another $100,000 in sales on there just to get the break even. So now I'm at 250. Now what's that math look like? Can I get there with the same 7 technicians? Do I have to open up 6 days a week? Do I have to get 2 shifts? You know what I mean? And those are the things you have to look at. And you can boil it down like you said. Effective labor rate has got to be X, Y, Z. But I think when you're looking at a business and you just, face value the financial statement, you have to come up with some kind of number that's at least a target to get you whatever number you want to look at. If the store's doing 10% net to gross, then all right, my next goal is 20 or 30. That's the way I'm gonna
Sure,
look at it. You
sure.
know, Parts is gonna float with it's gonna trail, but it's gonna be based on service 100%, not 100%, 80%, let's say, of your parts sales are gonna come by your service volume. That's where they're gonna get their number from. So you have to focus on service first. You have to.
Yeah, of course. Of course. It just blows my mind. And again, I don't it doesn't come up in conversations in my lane that often. But after you brought it up and I was working on it, I was writing about it. I'm like, wow, when was the last time we really had a conversation about break even analysis? When was the last time we talked about, net to gross? And you said 30%. And I was like, I could, if somebody would have asked me that question yesterday, I probably wouldn't have had a good answer for him. Where would you like to be? Or what do you think is a good number? Or this or that. It's like, well, that doesn't come up in my world, you know. And so, but I started laughing, or where it kind of comes into play for me is when I say pricing strategies, because if we don't know our break even, right? And then I use alignment as a kind of a catch all or, as a thing because I'll go out and teach people how to sell alignments and they got their alignment price incorrectly. Like they're paying 2 hours and charging $100. And so they got a $50 effective labor rate on an alignment. And so, you send somebody to my class, they come back and they're all fired up. And next thing you know, they go out and sell 10 alignments and their ELR and their gross profit goes down to like, why did I spend money sending them to Steve's class? Well, it wasn't Steve. Your advisor went, did everything you asked him to do, but he came home and your pricing strategy, you weren't priced appropriately and you're giving away the farm. And so now, good job for the advisor and bad job for the store.
Well, that's another one of those things too. I had a conversation with one of the DPSMs today from the factory. We were talking about the different stores that we had in a group and stuff, and comparing a few of the stores together. One of there was a big differentiation between the parts and labor ratio, a customer pay only, between a few of my stores. And, it went from, this is a Japanese import, brand. So you don't get a high parts to labor ratio as a general rule. 68, 70 cents right in there is probably with a decent mix. And, one store was at 56 and the other stores were right around 70. And, so I said, well, I kind of know that store a little bit, and I guarantee you they're cutting rotors and not replacing them. The other stores are replacing rotors. I know a lot of stores do that now. I said, and that alignment rack is always full at that store, always, right? So if they're doing a lot of alignments and they're doing a lot of competitive stuff, then you're going to lower your margins. You're going to throw some metrics out. Does that mean they're doing a bad job? No, it doesn't mean they're doing a bad job. I mean, I had a conversation, my good buddy Joe Camerata, one day when we get him on here, he'll agree. The story is we went to a Toyota performance group that they used to have in the region, right? And we have the same guy up front teaching the class, this guy Mark, telling us how great Toyotas were. They never break down. They never break down. They never break down. It's the greatest car on the planet. And can't disagree. It was a great car, right? 85% of our work mix was maintenance. 15% was repairs. That was the mix, right?
Right.
So this guy's telling us that we should be at, like, if I remember correctly, it was some like stupid numbers, like 85 cents to the dollar parts to labor ratio, right? So that means for every dollar in labor I sell, they thought I should sell 85 cents in parts, right? And I'm looking at Joe, and and these guys weren't even, nobody was sophisticated enough. Nobody was really doing tires at the time. We were, but most stores weren't. But tires always hit a different line. They didn't even count tires as a part sale, right? It wasn't even going up to that top line. It was separate. But anyway, we, sitting there with Joe, and I'm like, these guys, they just talk out of both sides of their mouth, right? It's the greatest car in the world. They never break down, but they want you to have a high parts to labor ratio, which is what you get if you have a car line that breaks down a lot. Like the Ford, the Chevrolet, the GMs, the European cars, they're always dollar to dollar, always, because you put a lot of parts in those cars, right?
Well, it's the diagnostic that I think that we're lacking as well. It's like, because I would always say 0.8 to 1.2, right? In that, depending on your brand, depending on your market, and so on. That's going to be your guideline. But if I saw a guy at 0.56, I'd be like, okay. Then I would go, what questions do I need to ask to find out why is it 0.5 versus 0.8 or 0.9 or 1 hour,
So
or 1 to 1.
he gets under my skin. This thing just gets under my skin when he says this, right? These cars never break down. Then he's telling us that we shouldn't do any kind of additives for our oil changes, no BG, no this, no that, no MOA, corrects, whatever we're using. None of this stuff, right? We're supposed to do this stuff. So Joe and I go back to the dealership and we take out the owner's manual and we look at the scheduled maintenance, an oil change all the way up to 30,000 miles. And we take nothing but factory parts. We include the oil in there. And the parts to labor ratio, if you followed the book exactly, was 43 cents to the dollar for the first 30,000 miles. So I'm like, okay, like, how am I going to get to this 80 cents again? Like, like the cars just didn't need much.
Right.
So fast forward, we come back and we had a couple brain surgeons in our class that had jumped, right? So the one guy was up in New York, and Tom, the nicest guy in the world, this guy Tom, just wasn't the brightest bulb some days, right? And he's bragging how we went up to like $1.20 to $1, in parts to labor ratio. And so we're like, how'd you do it? So he shows us the repair orders and stuff, and he's spiffing his technicians to sell struts, shocks, and batteries. So I'm like, okay. I said, I agree with that. I said, but most of the time our struts and shocks don't go bad. But okay, you're selling them, if you got a place to sell them, right? He goes, well, I'm spiffing them. That really helped to sell. So Joe takes the repair order, looks at it, and, he was also getting a 200% matrix on his parts to get them there too, right? So, like this is the guy, again, Mickey in the metric, right? But to your point, when you do this stuff and you're looking at your, you can't get hung up on some of the minutia. You can't get hung up on some of the the parts to labor ratio, the effective labor rate, the hours per row. I think you can't get hung up on that until you figure out what your work mix is, you know, what your customer base is. Are you doing all the basics? Are you providing a menu? Do you do good multi-point? Like, because all that stuff is going to vary. It's gonna change your effect. But the only thing I do know that's solid is if I don't spend another dollar a day and everything stays the same, I need $100,000 to break even.
There you
Right?
go. There you go.
You know,
Well,
and you got to figure out a way to get me there.
I don't know if this is the right part, but I'll go off on a tangent. Is you always talk about people have their, you know, their cup, right? Sometimes people have a 6 ounce cup and some people have 16, right? And so I always say the same thing about production capacity. You know, most people have I always look at capacity as a cup, right? And so many of our stores right now, the capacity is this little coffee cup and it's runneth over. And so what most people do is they go in, hire 1 or 2 techs, and they sort of they sort of being able to break even, right? They're kind of like, okay, well, I'm collecting everything, but I can't sell anymore, right? I'm not losing these people and I'm not a week out, but I'm still 1 or 2 days out. I can get enough done. But who's building who's building their mausoleum, their picture, so they got, you know, double the amount of technicians so they can actually sell something, you know what I mean? And so and I could tie that all the way back to break even analysis because yeah, I could break even with my 7 techs, but if I want to do X, I've got to have that bigger cup. I've got to have that pitcher. I used to draw a picture with a, you know, a pitcher or a stein of beer or, you know, a pitcher of beer because we got to have this. We got to have the availability, the openness to be able to do to do all of those things.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of how you have to look at it, right? You got the I got my glass of beer. I'm sitting here with my glass. It runs low. I need to fill it up. I got to have a tap. I got to have a pitcher, right? It's
Right.
exactly what it is.
Right.
And you know that's the thing. I think that a lot of stores, a lot of managers, they're not constantly farming. They're not looking for new technicians. They're not looking to to backfill. You know, Jesus, half the time they're not even out in the shop talking to their technicians. They don't even know that the guy's going to quit. You know, they find out somebody quit when they notice his toolbox is gone 2 days ago. But you know, it's true. You have to keep building the team from within because those numbers get larger. Your expenses go up. You want to hire another person. There's whatever it is. It's not static, this environment. So, you know, you can try to keep it stable, but it's never going to be static. So you have to grow. And who's happy with doing the same thing? I mean, if I was making, even if I was doing net to 30 and I was making whatever, an extra 30, 40,000 a month, it's not going to be good enough next year. It's not going to be good enough. You got to get a little bit more out of that, right? You got to figure out a way to squeeze.
Well, what's the calendar utilization anymore? I mean, we used to always go by 85%. I can't even
Mhm.
imagine it's near 85% right now in the post COVID world.
It's funny you say that because I think years ago I used to go with 93%. I don't know
Okay.
why I use that. I don't know where that number came from. And I would say you're probably close to 80% now, to try to get people to come to work. I mean, that's a whole nother episode. Let's talk about work-life balance and let's talk about, what you talk about it now is some of these people a little bit scatterbrained on this stuff. Actually, Tori said we should talk about carving out time for our health, and we should talk about the work-life balance. We should make an episode out of it. That was Tori's suggestion he sent over
I
the other day.
Man, I
Yeah.
agree. It's so funny. Every topic that you and I are talking about, I just wrote about it in my upcoming book, which will be to be announced later. But it's so funny is like the work-life balance, you know? And I agree. Like I have never missed a lunch in my entire life. I promise you, as a manager, I ain't missing lunch. It's mine. All right. And I don't expect anybody that works for me to miss a lunch, a break, or whatever. You are entitled to that. Do I go out and force you to take it? No, but I do my very best to make sure that you have that available. And when someone says I'm too busy, I don't accept that as an answer, right? So I think as much as humanly possible, people should. You're entitled to a 15-minute break according to the United States government. You know, you get a 15-minute break every 4 hours. Take it. You get a lunch hour, whether it's 30 minutes or an hour. You need to take that lunch. And, you know, our industry will allow you to work from bell to bell all day every day if you accept that. And I personally find that you know, a terrible practice. Without going into all the statistics, if I don't take a 15-minute break or an hour lunch, my productivity at the end of the day sucks anyway, you know. And so I am all about finding a work life balance and giving somebody a great work schedule, you know, make their day pleasurable. What else?
Let's put that as the next episode. Let's
All
chat
right.
about it. There's so much to talk about on that. There's a lot to it, and I think, younger guys, especially, what's the old expression is, if you had to go back in time and tell your 20-year-old self, you know, what to do, what not to do, whatever it is, what would you say? Well, nothing, because I wouldn't have listened to me, right? That's
Right.
that's the
Exactly.
20-year-old. We don't listen to anything, you know. But maybe we'll get through to one or two people with some thoughts where the younger people will listen to us, because that's what we're trying to do here. But to go back to this part you're talking about, the calendar utilization and the availability is a huge part of it when you're looking at it. Like, if you need a number, $250,000, if that's your sales number that you have, and, you got 7 technicians, and, you can only count on them being there 80% of the time, you're going to have a rough go of it, right? It's not going to be an easy, so, if you have 7 bays, and then you need 7 guys there 6 days a week is what you're probably going to need, right? Or you're going to be on 4-day work weeks, 10 hours a day, 11 hours a day, 13 hours a day, whatever the case may be, right? You're going to have to be in those, but you got to do the math. I mean, but it
Math.
starts with the break-even number. Where are you at today? Where do you want to be? All right, I want to be at $143,000 today. Okay, where do we want to be in 6 months? We want to be, I don't know, somewhere between there and 250, right? Whatever that number is. What do I got to do? I got to do, well, right now I need 20,000 in sale per tech per month to hit my number. Geez, I don't know if I could do that doing just, oil changes on Kias. I might have to do something else, right? So yeah, I mean, listen, I think, it opens up Pandora's box, but, to go back to, again, we casually mentioned this, and, we'd be an amazing podcast if we ever planned this shit out and scripted it. It would be really good, probably make more sense to people. But
Then it would be fun.
if again, until you know the starting point, you can't figure it out. And if you have a bigger shop, 10 bays, it's not hard to hit $140,000 to $250,000 in sales. That's cake, right? Some of these stores are 40 bays. Look at our boy Damon up in Canada. What's he? That dude's got what, 45 technicians? Something like that. It was turning some kind of crazy hours. I mean, I didn't even bother to sit down and figure out. I don't know what his labor rate is up in Canada, but I got to find out what's he got. He's got to be doing over $1 million a month in sales. Has to be. Dude.
Yeah, he was doing $1 million. I'm pretty sure. I think he was.
Yeah, it's got to be huge, right? I wonder what his break even is, though. I wonder if he's making any money.
Well,
you got to get him back on.
You were saying if we were to write this stuff down and get organized, that would be a training program. And I have enough of that, so I don't really want to. I don't want to turn our podcast into training. I just like shooting shit.
That's pretty funny. That is pretty funny. I like that. That's a good point.
We're not getting paid for this. This is just random discussions. But you better wrap us up with a GM tip of the day. And I think that we ought to come back and talk about the next topic, as you said.
GM tip of the day. I mean, take a look at your financial statement. I mean, generally speaking, you came from the sales department, sales, selling cars. I would tell you to look at those 4 or 5 departments you have in that business, whether it's new cars, used, service parts, and body shop. If you have a body shop department, see which ones are contributing to the bottom line. I guarantee you your service and parts departments are going to be better, probably doing more net profit than your new car and your used car departments. But take a look at them, show them a little love. Maybe work backwards. If you're doing, 10% net, 20% net, and you want to get up to 30, 40, then you have to do the math for them. But, take a look at that statement when you get a chance. I mean, there's a lot to see on that statement. The biggest thing I would say is look at the net profit for each department, and you got to work from there. I mean, that's what you do as a general manager. You got to help plan it. You got to paint the picture. Then you got to sell it. This is what we need. This is how we can do it. This is how we can get there. And listen, as this wise old guy Steve Shaw said, it's just math, man. It's just math.
It's just fixed ops is math.
It's just math. So,
all right, let's get out of here. I will see you next week.
All right, brother. Talk to you.
Fixed Ops Focus, now leasing your attention for 36 months with the option to buy in. Closed-end listening agreement, subject to credit-worthy curiosity. Subscribers must like, share, and tell their service team. Failure to comply may result in declining ELR, surprise tech walkouts, and a wash bay that floods on Mondays. See Dave and Steve for terms.